Hello, I'm your host, Rob So today, and I'm right inside the Royal Ontario Museum. And coming very shortly will be Dr. Justin Jennings, the curator of New World Archaeology, and he'll be showing us the real true secret of Maya, secrets of their ancient world. Hello, Dr. Justin Jennings. How you doing?
Very good.
All right, so you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
You know, it's tough. Maya's tough. You know, I always tell people we had two other shows, the last two shows we did, cultural shows. One on terracotta warriors, one on Dead Sea Scrolls. Terracotta warriors from China, you know what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on the terracotta warriors. You know what the Big Bang is. You know what the storyline is. Dead Sea Scrolls, wow. You know it's going to be about Dead Sea Scrolls. And you know it's going to be about that one cave, that set of caves in Israel that provided those. With Maya, it's harder. So one of the biggest challenges we had is, okay, what do people want to see with Maya? What are some of the conceptions that they bring in? What are some of the misconceptions that they have? So, for example, 2012. People were excited about 2012. They say, okay, the Maya had a lot to say about it. Well, actually, they don't. The classic Maya had very little to say about 2012. But those are kind of things that people think about when they come to the show. So a lot of times what we do is we do our own audience research as well. Find out what does the public want to see? What do they think they want to see about Maya? What are some of their conceptions about Maya? And so we take that information, take what we can get from places like Mexico, of some of the objects, and then try to craft a story with them. So in this case, our basic idea was, hey, look, this is a story that's going to take you almost in the footsteps of those Maya living in that period. So we're going to walk from the jungle, through the fields, into the palaces, into the tombs, into the temples. And so that was the idea. So our Maya show here is supposed to give you a sense of what it was like when the first explorers saw some of these great ruins in the 1840s. So when you come into our space, you'll see some beautiful footage, some video, temple facade, and then really get into that moment of discovery. So something like this, for example, a sculpture from Tonina. We would have first got there, people would have been amazed. But what was it? Who was this person? What are those symbols? What are those masks? And so that's that moment we're talking about, that moment of discovery. But after 200 years, we know a lot more. And so the rest of the show tells you what we learned from epigraphers, archaeologists, and other scholars. So in this section here, it's basically the nuts and bolts. So it gives you a sense of what the Maya world was like. So we're talking about the classic Maya, 250 to 900 AD, talking about the Yucatan Peninsula of Mesoamerica. And so we introduce you to some of the people, some of the animals, and just give you a sense of what their world was like.
Could you also distinguish between the Maya and the Inca?
Maya can be difficult a little bit because people get excited about Maya. You know, they say, oh wow, the Maya. But sometimes it's almost like full stop the Maya. And you don't quite know what what temple, jungle maybe, but where are they in space? Where are they in time? And then they often get confused with things like the Inca and the Aztec. Okay, so part of the problem, right, is the word Maya is for a people that still live today. There's 10 million Maya today. Those Maya go all the way back 2,000, 3,000 BC. This show focuses on one period in the Maya, 250 to 900 AD. Now, these guys are about 700 years before the Aztecs, okay, that are right around the end of the 15th century. And then the Incas are in Peru, so they're a long ways away from a similar period, around the 15th, end of the 15th century AD. So in this case, what we have is the Maya are a culture from Mesoamerica, the same region as the Maya, a little bit different, a little bit further south, but a much earlier culture as well. One of the most important aspects of the Maya world, you have to understand they're organized around great cities, hundreds of cities organized into small city-states. At the heart of those cities were the sacred rulers, the Kahul Ahau. Those are the kings and queens that organized Maya life. So this is the city. The basic idea here is that you've walked into a plaza of one of the great Maya cities. So this is where you would see, back say at 700 AD, you see the ball game being played. You might see great performances, people drinking, people celebrating the gods. You might see incense burners, great fashions, etc. So this introduces you to everything that would have been happening in those incredible plazas of the great Maya city-states.
And archaeologically, did the Maya also work on earthworks that can be seen through an aerial view?
Yeah, there's a bit of earthworks a lot of times. So, for example, when you think Maya, you certainly think a lot of the stoneworks. You think, you think the temples, the palaces, etc. One of the things that's interesting is something they're called sakbes. They're roads that go from one site to another. These are especially big a little bit later on in the Classic Mayan into the Terminal Classic and Post-Classic era. And so you often see it's almost like a highway system that connects different sites with each other. And so there's often a lot of earthworks in terms of just simply fields, terraces being built, raised field agriculture. And unfortunately, the Maya are tough because oftentimes there's a lot of ground cover. And so the only thing you see popping up are the pyramids and the temples. But of course, they transformed that landscape. Most of the Maya world wouldn't have been jungle or forest. It would have been fields. And just after they've collapsed, after those cities collapsed and people moved away from some of these places, the jungle and the forest encroached upon it. And so you would have seen a much different place. There were the earthworks, the fields, the terraces, as well as, of course, the fantastic palaces, temples, and ball courts, etc.
How important was that for the society of the Maya?
Oh, I mean, ball courts were essential. If you look at any Maya city, you'll see they're organized around three things. They're organized around the ball courts, the temples, and the palaces. And so the ball course, what they were, in part, it's just a game. That you have a solid rubber ball, 3 to 4 kilos, pretty heavy. You bounce it back and forth from one end of the court to another. But it's also a ritual game. It's about the struggle of the forces of life over the forces of death. And it was almost a case of sympathetic magic, in the sense they thought by playing that game, they helped in that ongoing struggle between life and death. So for them it was essential. Playing the ball game, it was fun. People went to watch, spectator, sport, etc. But it also had great ritual significance, and you really needed to play the game in order to make the world work. And so that's why the ball court was front and center. And a lot of those rulers are often depicted with their big protection over their waist, their elbow pads, knee pads, etc., because they often played the game themselves. So one of the things that people get excited about is sacrifice. You say, well, did the Maya sacrifice hundreds or thousands of people? The answer is no. The Maya did do sacrifice, but usually just a handful of people. So for example, after war, sometimes they would take captives, and they'd take those captives back to the city, and they'd sometimes sacrifice them to their gods. So sacrifice was important, but was only a small part of the ancient Maya. And so this is a section where we talk about the ancient Maya beliefs. So how did they think the universe formed? What about the sun god? What are the rituals that they used? So here, for example, is a pot that shows you about the creation of the world and the slaying of what's sometimes called the cosmic crocodile. And so by looking at these objects, we get a sense of what their world was like and what they believed in. One of the most important rituals, and one of the most fascinating, is auto-sacrifice. In this case, what we see is people were sacrificing themselves. They would take a bone, a bit of obsidian, or something else. They'd take blood from their tongue, their ear, the men from the foreskin of their penis. And what they do is they'd collect that blood in pots full of rags. Then they'd burn that blood. And from that burning, the smoke would come a vision serpent, shown here. That vision serpent would open up its jaws. Out would pop the head of an ancestor or a god, and they'd actually speak to the living. So it was a way to communicate with the dead, with the gods, was through offering your own blood. And that's one of the many rituals that the Maya would use. We know that most of the Maya writing was actually in these codices. There's only 3 of them that preserve from before the Spanish came. This is a facsimile of one. Most of the Maya writing that we see is actually then now on plates, other ceramics, and on the great monuments that they carved. But unfortunately, although you say to yourself, wow, we can read the writing, oftentimes it's hard to understand. They talked about only a few things, oftentimes in a shorthand, that if you weren't Maya, it's often hard to grasp. So even though we can read what they wrote, sometimes we can't fully get it.
Speaking of glyphs, how important was that? Was most of the society literate, or was it just for the noble?
Those glyphs were only meant for a specific audience. They're written by elite scribes, for the elite. So 99% of the Maya world couldn't read those glyphs. They weren't directed towards them. They were directed towards those folks and then talked about their concerns. So not talking about how to farm the field, They're talking about different ceremonies, entering sweat baths, the lives of different kings and priests and gods. So it reflects elite concerns. It talks about a narrow amount and was just for those few people. So here, for example, is one piece, a panel celebrating the life and death of a ruler of Palenque called Kanpalam. And here you have an artist carving, a stone around the time of his death. But once again, you can read it, it's hard to understand. They flip and flop. They talk at one point about the king, other times they talk about the stone. And so it can be oftentimes frustrating, even though when you can read those glyphs. The next section of our show here is on 2012 and in telling time in general. And so the Maya were fascinated with time. The basic idea was that they had two systems, one a calendar round of 52 years, the other the long count. Now the long count is important because the long count is where all this fascination with 2012 comes from. In 3114 BC, the classic Maya thought the world began. On December 23rd, 2012, is when we'll have the end of what's called the 13th Baktun, which is a cycle of 400 years. Now for the Maya, 2012 would have been a huge event, the end of 13 Baktuns. But what it was just the end of a cycle. The next year would be the next day would be the beginning of 14 Baktuns. So what would the classic Maya have done in 2012? It would have had a big party, it would have been a big event, but for them it was just the end of a cycle, not the end of time, despite what you might see in all those books and movies. You have an image here of a rollout from a vessel that shows different individuals bringing things to the ruler, hammocks, pots, other things they're giving to him as tribute. And then also some other rituals. For example, here you have rituals of people staring into mirrors, talking to the other world. Enemas, ritual enemas, where people take basically a liquid filled with tobacco and use that in order to have hallucinations. So one of the greatest pieces in the show, and indeed the sort of piece that you often see in some of the advertising, is this one right here. And what this piece is here, it's an incense burner found inside of a cave. And what this shows you is the jaguar god of the underworld. It's actually the sun god, but when he shows up again, when he goes underground, he turns into a fearsome jaguar. And so this is depicting a ruler that actually wants to be like that jaguar god, wants to go underground and come out the other side. And so this is the idea with death, is that for rulers, what they wanted to do was not only die, but they wanted to be able to leave the underworld and come out the other side and live with the great ancestors and the rulers. So it's just one of those many pieces that I hope will get people excited when they go to the show.
How important was the site of Palenque, historically, culturally, archaeologically?
Yeah, so Palenque is one of the many, they said, 100, more than 100, almost 200 Maya sites that we know of. And Palenque was one of the more important ones. It wasn't the most important. Some of those are something like Calakmul and Tikal. But it's very important for a number of reasons. One, it's got incredible artwork. Two, it's got many, many glyphs that are preserved. So it actually does a lot in terms of the unraveling of the Maya glyphs, understanding the Maya. So it's been very important archaeologically. It's important for our show as well because the two curators that we brought in to work on the show from Mexico with our collaborators from the National Institute of Anthropology and History, they worked at Palenque. So they knew the archaeology there, they had the connections. So we were able to get some incredible stuff from Palenque that would have never left if we hadn't been working with them. So what it is, when we're on this show, we talk about many different cities, but we focus a little bit more on Palenque because we have that expertise there, and it really is. It's a World Heritage Site. It's an incredibly beautiful site. It's an important site, and so we tend to focus a bit more on Palenque than we do on other sites in this show. Also, just a note for the children, we've got lots of touchables. So, for example, here is a famous reproduction of a famous sarcophagus lid of a great king named Pakal. It's about half size. It shows Pakal being resurrected. And once again, it's nice for children, for people that may not be able to see too well, to actually touch a little bit and get a sense of some of these places.
The kids' guide and how you organize that into the graphic novel. Could you explain, just for the audience, a bit about that?
Yeah, so a lot of times we look at different audiences and say, okay, well, how can they experience a show? And of course, if you're a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 12-year-old, you're going to experience it differently than an adult. And so one of the things we try to do is, okay, how can we make these shows more appealing to kids, and so that they get things that perhaps some of the adults may not, get as excited about. So we did 2 things for this. One, we did a kids guide, for littler kids, and basically it's almost like an adventure hunt. And so you're going from different artifact to different artifact, trying to find out, for example, about chocolate, because a lot of kids, of course, like a lot of adults, they love chocolate. So how do you make chocolate? Have a chocolate recipe in there, for example. Learn about the ball game. Kids are fascinated about sports and ball games. Learn a little bit about that. So give it to them a little bit more on that kids level, by that kid's perspective. The other thing that we did, which is really exciting as well, was this graphic novel. So basically a comic book that's based loosely on a real story of a guy named David Stewart that grew up with his father as an archaeologist at the site of Palenque. And he got so excited about Maya writing, Maya epigraphy, all those glyphs, that what he ended up doing is that he started learning about this stuff as a teenager. He won one of these MacArthur Genius Fellowships when he was only 18 years old. And so what we want to do was get people, this is an awesome story for a 13-year-old, right? And so what we want to do is make a graphic novel. It actually looks stunning, but actually takes some of those aspects of his life and actually almost takes you a little bit through the exhibit, but with that mentality, in this case, of finding an object and trying to understand what it is through a couple of stops through the exhibit. So through that adventure guide and through that graphic novel, I think we really hopefully get some of the kids really jazzed about the show, and so the adults can enjoy it as well as the kids are hopefully running around and doing their own kind of explorations.
And which other museums, in collaboration with the ROM, helped out in making this project possible?
Yeah, so this is a big collaboration. Yeah, I said, collaboration inside the ROM, hundreds of people involved in the show. But for us, this is a big collaboration with Mexico, with the National Institute of Anthropology and History. They actually had a couple of curators working with us, lots of other folks on their end, making sure this was right. So actually most of the objects, about 170 of the 250 objects you see on display, are from Mexico. But they're not the only collaborators. We also worked with the Canadian Museum of Civilization in Gatineau. So they did a couple of the pieces of touchable art, for example, and they worked very closely with us in some of the labeling, some other things to get the show going on. We also have things from the British Museum, from the Princeton Art Museum, from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And all these folks had a little bit to say in the show. They made the logos, they had the curators come out. So it's amazing if you actually sit down here and do all the math about how many people and what they did. It takes quite an army of people to put this together.
What were some of the challenges that you faced when organizing the Maya exhibit?
Every show is just a challenge. There's hundreds of people, there's lots of moving parts, things always go wrong. So in this case, we were down in the the Tomb of Pakal, one of the great rulers of Palenque, and it's moist down there. And of course, camera equipment doesn't do well in the moisture. So we lost a camera, we lost a light for a little bit, had to figure it out, but it all worked out. Things like that. You've got the monsoon season in Mexico, so you have to figure out during the rainy season, well, what's going on? How do we get things from point A to point B? Because sometimes it doesn't work out. But of course, we got people that know what they're doing. We got professionals, conservators, preparators, people from Mexico. We figured it out. So sometimes, hopefully you don't see it. Like, the night before, we're trying to paint things, trying to put the last objects in, even the day before people show up. And you take a breath, you try hard, and usually most stuff comes out. So in this case, I think it ended up, at least I'm happy with it. I think we did a pretty good job. We have videos here. One of the videos that we were able to shoot in the highlands of Chiapas, we actually went and talked to some of those 10 million Maya living today about their language, about their customs, about their links to the ancient Maya world. So we end this show on this note of, hey, we're not talking about the Maya as an ancient culture. We're also talking about the Maya today as a living culture that continue to prosper in this world.
So Justin, thanks again for giving us a wonderful tour of the Maya exhibit, Secrets of the Ancient World. We appreciate your time and commitment that you made, and
you very much. My pleasure.